Let's sculpt a gargoyle. Our project today will be step-by-step instructions for those of us who are not degreed artists. This is designed for newbie sculptors. So for those of you with a lot of experience, you're going to find that I've oversimplified quite a bit. So please don't crucify me in the comment section. Again, this is meant for our new crafters trying something different. This is episode 5 of the Toxic Waste Cave series. We're going to make the inside of the gargoyle, so that's called an armature. But the first step for this particular project is the planning. Planning is essential for this particular project. Now, I really like the guy on the lower left. All of these are images of Atlas. He's epic, shouldering the world on his back. And I liked how he had one leg up in the air and the other leg was on the rock. And I used that in my particular sculpture. The other ones I liked because of their musculature. They look powerful. But I wanted to make this Halloween, so I added some animal elements. I really like the idea of some substantial ram's horns, so those are included. But the face I wanted to be more lion-like with the underbite of that bulldog. He's so cute. I really, again, wanted to make this my own. So as you think about yours, make it your own. Now, again, for those of us who aren't artists, it's helpful to understand basic human dimensions. For example, an arm is about 2 heads long to the wrist. And then a person is roughly about 7 heads tall. Of course, there's variation. And this is helpful as a baseline to understand for your project. Now, I did not use those dimensions for this build. His head is very long. It's a lion's head. And so this actually ended up being 5 heads tall, roughly. So what is an armature? Now that we have our design, we can start to bring that to life in the most basic way. So you're not going to use all clay for your sculpture. Most clay sculptures actually have stuff inside called an armature. Now, I'm very well aware that there are some clay sculptures that are 100% clay, but the armature for this case is very helpful for 2 reasons. The first is it adds strength, and the second is it gives us a way to start to visualize what our sculpture is going to be like. It lets us think about where the muscles and bones will be. If you're new to sculpting, doing the armature will be a huge help in making your project easier and successful. I think you can be successful without it, but why make it harder than it needs to be? So supplies. The platform, I used florist wire and aluminum foil. The wire could be any kind, as just the wire I had on hand. It's actually from the dollar store. So step 1, admire my cat. That's back here. He's our channel mascot. No, step 1 is actually grab the aluminum foil. So we're going to just make this rock out of straight aluminum foil. This is part of my overall design. So as you saw earlier, those images of Atlas, he was standing or kneeling on a rock and then holding up the world, or in my case, the skeleton head, the skull. That's just above the whole project. So this part's really, really easy. You want to make it roughly rock shaped. Make it exactly like you like it. Okay, now we're getting more technical. For step 2, we're going to make shoulders and hips. So it's almost going to look like a bow when it's done. So if you ever wrapped a Christmas present or tied a bow on your shoe, that's kind of what this is going for. So you'll get your wire, you'll find the center, and in this case, I needed to tie it because this particular wire isn't the most rigid wire because of the heavy plastic. So if you're using a better wire, you may not need to do that full knot step that I had to take. And the goal here is to make shoulders, so we're not making the full arms. And you don't have to make these closed loops. You are going to want something to hook the wire arms into later. Perfectionism at this step is not essential because you're going to be making a lot of adjustments. You're going to be touching it a lot. So you want these in roughly the right spot, but don't worry that one is higher than the other. For the hips, we're going to use a similar process, but keep in mind, and you can try this yourself, if you kneel and have one knee touching the floor and the other knee in the air, it is more often than not common to have one hip lower than the other. So the hip that's attached to the knee that's on the ground is often a little bit lower. So let's form the head. This part I like to do now because it helps me visualize how big the person / gargoyle needs to be. Again, thinking back about the measurement images that I showed using the human head to map different parts of the body. This foil, once I scrunch it down, ends up being about an inch wide and maybe an inch and a half, 2 inches tall. Again, it's not totally compacted just yet. It will be. And don't forget to leave room for the neck. I mean, okay, if you're making something that's more buffalo looking and it really doesn't have a defined neck, it's your art project. That's the wonderful thing about doing a fantasy sculpture, is that there's really no wrong way to do it. All right, I compacted everything. He's got a neck. Now we're going to move on. So let's make the torso. Doing the torso for me added a bit of security, but it's not required. The wire rod is threaded, and while I tied or secured the wire for the shoulders very tightly, very firmly pressing the foil into those grooves on the wire rod, it gave it a little bit more stability and security. So it's something I like to do at this step. Because our next step is step 4, we're going to make those wire arms. So take a piece about 10 inches long and then bend the end a little less than an inch just to make a little hook. We want to be able to attach it to the shoulder. Then you'll add another bend to the wire roughly where you want the elbow to be. It's going to get adjusted later. And then after that, we're going to form the hand. So we form roughly a mitten shape. We want a thumb and a wider piece for the fingers. We'll do the fingers later, but this is the support that keeps it all together. So once that's into place, you can firmly crimp the hook for the shoulder to the hook for the arm together, and then put it roughly where you want it on the skull. Now we're going to readjust that wire for the elbow later because it's obviously too high, but that's the beauty of learning as you go. You can make adjustments. It doesn't have to be perfect on your first try. So for the left arm, we'll repeat the same process as before. Don't worry about the hands moving. We're going to glue them into place later. I'm actually kind of tucking them in between the the head and the skull to more or less success. But again, we're not looking for perfection at this step. We're trying to get a feel for the overall movement and shape of the piece for later on. Step 5, let's do the legs. So these legs are different, just as a reminder. We're going to do the one that is bent at the knee with the foot on top of the rock. So we're not going to do the foot at this step. We're going to start with the leg, bend the knee, and then we're going to fold over the rest over the top of the hip, pressing down and then around, and then we're going to actually end up folding it back. I had a little bit of extra on this particular one on purpose. I wanted to add strength for the top of the thigh. And there is a little piece on the left. Remember, that is the other attachment for the left side of the hip. And it's lower by design because of the way your body, your hips are when you're kneeling down. Same as before, make a hook, just like we did with the arms, not the other leg, and attach it to the hip, and then bend the wire to form the thigh, the knee touching the rock, and then the leg extending behind. Once you've got the dimensions roughly where you want, bend the extra wire in the back to add some strength to that back foot that will be hanging up in the air later, and then touching the rock. Bending the excess around to form the back of the calf. With extra bending forward and then being cut right around where the knee is. Let's add some more foil. It's starting to really look like a creature now. This time I'm forming the bottom of the torso. Again, by wrapping foil very tightly between the hip wires and the top. So no, I'm not giving my gargoyle breasts. This is simply just filling in the area for the very large pectoral muscles. So if you think about somebody lifting something really heavy, the pectoral muscles will be flared out. They will be spread wide to their fullest. The shoulders will be fully engaged. And so even on men, it is a very distinctive feature when you're doing an epic build like this. I did an extra piece of foil and started to wrap it around the back for the glutes. And then continue to do the thigh. I mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. Think about how muscles are on a human body as you're doing the foil. So you'll want to add bulk on the thighs, but leaving less bulk near the knee. It'll be a more natural look. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect at this step because we're going to be covering this with clay. So whatever you do now, you're going to be covering with clay, so it's going to be bigger later, and adjustments can be made, fine adjustments can be made with that clay. Now, as you begin to touch your piece, some of the wire may get bumped out of place. Not to worry. So we'll check out a side view of what I mean by some of the foil being molded into muscle shapes. And it's a great view on the side with the thigh that I'm working on now. Again, the bulk of the thigh is near the top with very little near the knee. I add a lot more clay to that in the future to give him more defined buttocks as well as thighs. I wanted him to be really thick. I formed the calf with foil and also covered the foot. The foot is sticking up in the air, so you see the bottom of the foot. So it is more three-dimensional than the other foot at this stage. They will all be three-dimensional when I cover them with clay, but because it is up in the air, I wanted it to have support with wire and a little bit of foil underneath all that clay. Continue to add foil wherever the bulk seems a little light, remembering at all times that we're going to be thinking about where people have muscles. So reference images of the internet, bodybuilders lifting heavy things if you're choosing to do a gargoyle with a lot of muscles. You could also do a dad bod gargoyle, which would be hilarious, and I want to see. So find me on Instagram if you do that, because I have to see those images. But for the rest of you, I also want to see yours. Find me on Twitter, find me on Instagram. I can't wait to see it. I've got links in the YouTube posting for those different websites. So go find me on social media. It's easy. So now we're going to build up the bicep and the forearm, also the hand. We use the same principles as before. More foil on the bicep because he's ripped like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Less on the forearm because if you look at your own, it's more than likely much skinnier than your bicep. And then I'm covering the little mitten hand with a little bit of foil. That's a nice to have, but not a requirement because it's such a small space. It could easily be filled in with clay. We will glue those hands into place later, but for now, I think it's looking really good. We've got a really nice, firm base for our clay. Repeat the same process with the other arm, adding a cover to the hand, a little bit to the forearm, and more bulk with the bicep. Step 7, let's make the wings, and I'll break it down for you because it looks hard, but it's actually pretty easy. You'll start with two 18-inch pieces of wire bent into the shape you see. On the left, we've got a 2-inch piece before the first bend, going up about 4.5 inches, with the remainder as the outside, the longest section of the wing. That 2-inch section that we started with, that's actually going to go inside, and it's going to hook to the shoulders later. Let's make those wings first. Lay it down on some foil and make a nice triangle, being very careful to limit the amount of wrinkles. Now, wrinkles aren't the end of the world here. You'll be covering it with clay, but these, will be easier to do later on if they're not really wrinkly. Now, I am making what appears to be a wrinkle right now. It's actually one of the creases in the wings. I know real bats, they have some bony structures in there, not going all the way down, but still, it adds a really nice effect. I'm going to continue to tear the foil to go around the piece of the wire that hooks into the gargoyle's shoulder. And again, folding as neatly as I can, as tightly to the wire. Any little bumps and imperfections can be smoothed over with clay, so don't worry too much if your wire isn't perfectly straight. Now I only have one crease and then overall the outside edges of the wing, and that's not enough. So it's easy to make another one. I'll actually just use a spare bit of foil to do that, and I do that next. Fold the foil over a few times to make it rigid enough. Then tear the piece off. Making sure all the edges are very uniform. And then put it into place. I was able to put it into place without using any kind of glue or other attachments. If you have any trouble, don't be shy. Use glue or whatever you deem best to make this your own project and make it work for you. So continue to add extra pieces to get the look that you want for your gargoyle's wings. So now we're ready to fold over the remaining part of the foil. As carefully as I can, I'm smoothing it, being very mindful to make sure that the ridges are very, very visible underneath this extra piece of foil. I'm actually using it in a way to amplify what's there. And then you want to flip it. And again, using your fingers, trace the ridges, the ribbing of the wings to make it visible from all angles. And any extra foil that you have, you can either tear off or fold over, depending on your preference. These will be covered with the clay later, so either choice is a great choice. You don't want too much bulk on the wings, but as you can see, they're pretty light but very sturdy if you use this method. So at this point we're going to attach the wing, but we're going to need to remove some of the foil that we have and set it aside for use later. For example, part of the shoulder, and his head is missing too. I did that on purpose. I wanted to be able to attach the wire as centrally to the project, to the armature, as I could. I wanted it to be very, very secure because the wing is quite large. Later on, it will be attached with additional clay, both at the top between the shoulder blades, but also lower down where it does touch the gargoyle. But at this point, it is a bit floppy. I mentioned before we took off part of the shoulder and the head. I'm going to go put that back on now that the wing is attached. I've got it attached very securely. You will notice that the head is not going to be perfect. That gets covered up with hair later. Because of the nature of the rod that we're covering, you have to make some compromises with the overall shape of your creature. But that's why I went with the lion's head. They've got that kind of massive, thick musculature that I thought worked really well with this. And the hair is a great way to hide some of the weird proportions that happen because of that big old pole. So attach the wing, the other wing, the same that you did the right wing, and your armature will be done. You're ready for clay. So this looks absolutely fantastic. We've got the essential parts of the gargoyle in place. The skeleton is there, sort of. That's the armature. We've covered it with aluminum foil. That's the muscles. But we're going to amplify it with the clay. So that's where we're going to get the details. We're going to fine-tune the proportions. Come back next week. I'll do another video on Sunday talking all about the first steps of clay. I hope to see you again soon, and in the meantime, check out some of my other videos. Thanks for stopping by.